I used to work the night shift at a small, isolated gas station just off the highway. It wasn't the busiest place, especially during the late hours, but it was still a job. The station was positioned in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods on one side and fields on the other. Sometimes I'd go hours without seeing a single customer, and the loneliness would get to me. One night, around 3 a.m., the station was dead quiet. I just finished stocking the shelves when I noticed a car pull up. It was an older sedan, dark colored. The headlights were off, and it rolled up to the pump slowly. I stood behind the counter, staring at the vehicle through the window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then I saw a shadow of a person in the car, sitting motionless in the driver's seat. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. It was odd. There was no one else around, and the car had no license plates. Maybe they're just tired. People sometimes rest on the side of the highway. I waited for the driver to move, but nothing happened. I picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency police line, asking them if they can come check it out. The dispatcher told me that they'll send someone by, but it could take a while since no one was in the area. My eyes kept darting to the window, but the car remained still. The figure inside just staring forward from what I could tell. Minutes passed, and the unease in my chest grew heavier. Eventually, I grabbed my flashlight, muttered to myself that I should at least go see if the person was okay, and stepped out into the cold night air. I flashed my light through the window. The person inside hadn't moved a muscle. It was then I saw it. The figure wasn't holding onto the steering wheel. Their hands were pressed flat against their face as if they were cradling it in their palms. It was a strange, unnerving position. I knocked gently on the window. "Hey, are you alright?" The figure didn't move, not even a twitch. I could feel my pulse picking up speed and dread began to creep through me. What if this person was gone? I took a step back towards the dark woods. I then turned to head back to the station. That's when I heard it. A low scraping sound, like nails on metal. I spun around. I was startled. And let's say I wasn't as manly as I thought at this moment. My flashlight shaking in my hands. And there, behind the car, was another figure, standing in the shadows. I froze. The second figure stood motionless, staring in my direction, almost as if they had been waiting for me to notice. My heart was pounding in my chest. I could barely breathe. Then, without warning, the first figure in the car jerked upright. Their hands dropped from their face, and they looked directly at me. I jumped back, stumbled over my feet, and rushed inside, slamming the door behind me. My hands had never shaken as much as they shook as I tried to lock the door. I hurried to the phone. I called the police again. I can only imagine how I sounded on this call. I told them about the figures, about the car, everything. The dispatcher assured me that they were sending someone over, but it didn't seem like they were taking me that seriously. Moments later, the car pulled away, shining their headlights to the window as they pulled out. It drove off down the dark road towards the highway. The police never showed up. I don't know if I imagined it or something was really out there, but I can imagine those eyes staring at me, and the scraping sounds still haunt me. I ended up quitting that job not long after. It was just too creepy for me. Was this person in the woods watching me? Did they get out of the car when I wasn't looking? To this day, I don't know who or what those figures were, but it often crosses my mind, and I feel so lucky that I got back in on time. This story isn't as dramatic as other ones on the sub, but it was incredibly terrifying for me to experience. It happened to me yesterday, late in the afternoon. I had just finished buying some snacks from the gas station when this man approached me as I was walking home. It was dark out, so the only thing I could make out was that he was about 2 inches taller than me, had a green jacket on with a hood, and had fair skin. He asked me what's in my backpack. I try walking away, but he grabs my bag and refuses to let me go. He demands I hand him my bag. I tried my best to plead with him, saying he can just have the food inside if he was hungry. He didn't care. He kept fighting me for the bag. I did my best holding my ground and putting up a fight. Several drivers passed me, but none of them bothered to stop and help me. I was all alone on a dark and empty sidewalk. The gas station was in a pretty bad part of town, bunch of drug addicts and violent people. I used to live there, so I knew the cops were regularly called into this neighborhood. I'm glad I managed to escape that environment 2 years ago. Eventually, this man removes his hand from his pocket, and I start fearing for the worst. I almost expected him to pull out a knife, but thankfully, it was only his fist. He begins banging hard on my fist to the point that they start to bleed. I couldn't take it anymore, so I handed him the bag and watched him run off. There was only some chips and juice in there, so it's not like I lost anything valuable. I walked the entire way home, constantly looking over my shoulder in case that bastard came back for more. I didn't call the police because I knew nothing would be done about it. I barely even had a description of this guy, so they wouldn't really have anything to go off of. I'm currently at work with a bandaged hand, trying my best to get through the day despite the pain. I hope this guy who did it ends up messing with the wrong person and gets the hell beaten out of him. I wish I never went to that neighborhood. I wish I had stayed home. Just got back from work late at night, and I stopped at the gas station on the way. For context, I'm a guy in my 30s. As I pulled into the gas station, I noticed an old beater sedan with its lights off, parked on the side of the building. As I pulled past the car, I saw that someone was in there. So as I park, I look over, and the other car starts moving with the lights off and parks 2 spaces down from me. I keep looking because it's late at night and weird behavior. I see this guy, mid-50s white guy with a baseball hat, turn the interior light on and just stare me down. Not moving, just staring. I'm like, whatever, and go get my stuff inside. The guy never gets out or goes inside. As I'm leaving the store, I can see he hasn't moved an inch, just following me with his eyes as I walk back to my car. At this point, I'm holding a knife I carry in my pocket, ready for this guy to try something. I make it to my car and climb in. After I start my car, I look over again, and he's still completely unmoving, just staring straight at me with his interior light on. We were the only 2 cars there. At this point, I think he's either an unmarked cop or a fucking serial killer. I slowly pull out and watch him stare at me the whole time I drive out of the gas station. He never pulled out or followed. Honestly, this is probably a boring story for you guys, but it was so uncanny and unsettling. I wanted to post it here to see if anyone had a similar encounter. I stupidly made the decision to get gas at 11 p.m. one night because I didn't make time before work to go. So I'm pulling up to the gas station and there were a couple cars at the pumps, which I sort of felt relieved at and more safe going in. I go inside to pay the clerk since I'm using cash, and as I'm going to the pump to put the gas in, most of the cars are leaving except this one truck parked 2 pumps beside me. I get in my car and wait for my gas to be filled, and I'm on the phone, and all of a sudden I see this guy walking around the front of my car very suspiciously. I sort of glance up to see what he's doing, but at this point, I had made eye contact with him. Shit. He then proceeds to ask me if I have any change for gas, and I nod. No, sorry. He says, okay, that's cool. Hey, do you want me to remove your gas pump for you? I say, no, I'm good, thanks. At this point, my gas is filled up, and he knows, and he's kind of fidgeting as well, and walks away behind my car. I'm trying not to glance back and be subtle about looking where he was, because I didn't want to alarm him with how terrified I am. In my head, I'm thinking about how I can leave the car with him still around my car. At this point, no one is in the lot, and I'm waiting till another car pulls up. 5 minutes later, nothing. So my fight or flight responses are really kicking my ass on what I should do next. It's really cold out. I haven't turned my car on because the pump is still in my car, and I don't know where this man is at. Then I finally see him walk towards the truck, but not entering it, just around it. But as soon as his back is towards me, I go for the pump and take it out, and he notices me and quickly approaches me and says, "Oh hey, you're really beautiful," still walking towards me. I nod and quickly and subtly put my gas cap back on. He says, "I don't look like a serial killer, do I?" With this crazed look in his eyes. Like, yeah, motherfucker, you actually do. But at this point, I bolted to my car and drove off quickly. So ladies, please avoid going to the gas stations at night or carry some sort of protection with you, because I sure as hell will from now on. And I've learned my lesson. It wasn't as bad as it sounds, but it definitely could have taken a different turn of events had I done things differently. Some background info. I was 24 at the time, and so was my husband. Our daughter was 2 at the time. We were on a road trip to see some family. About 20 minutes outside of the town we live in was this big gas station with a wide variety of snacks. Whenever we go on a trip, we would always stop there for gas, drinks, and snacks. It's in the middle of the day, in the middle of summer. So we pull in. My husband finds a pump to fill up at. We had all gone to the bathroom before leaving the house, so I left our daughter in the car while he filled up, and I went inside to fill our water bottles and grab some snacks. Like I said, this gas station was fairly large for the area, but not like huge or anything. The bathroom and the water fountain were down a fairly secluded hallway. There was only one cashier, and the line was kind of long, so I decided to buy snacks first, then go to the hallway to fill up the water bottles on the way out, in case the line got longer. Meanwhile, my husband had finished pumping gas and pulled into the parking spot in front of the building to wait for me, but all the windows were covered with posters and stuff, so I didn't notice. Anyway, while I was in line, holding our snacks and water bottles in my arms, a couple guys immediately get in line behind me. They're all tall. I'd estimate they were 6 feet at least. They wore very nondescript clothes, khaki shorts, and blank gray t-shirts. I didn't hear them speak any English, and I can't 100% confirm what language they spoke, but it sounded Middle Eastern, although they were Caucasian. Not super unusual for the area because there's a big college town nearby. I don't really like anyone being directly behind me, so I turned so the guys were in my peripheral vision, and I looked at the display of toys while I waited. I do this move a lot when I'm waiting in line, and basically every time, nobody notices or cares that I turn so I can see people, and they certainly don't move around while waiting in line nearly as much as these guys did. One of them was full on staring at me, and his expression was plainly unsettling to me. But he hadn't done anything to me, so I just smiled, gave a half nod, and looked away while still keeping them in my field of view. They were whispering among themselves, even though nobody could understand their language, and it wasn't exactly quiet in there. I just had a gut feeling that they were talking about me because they both kept openly staring at me and nobody else, even though it was fairly busy. Then they started to move so they were directly behind me. And for 4 minutes straight, as I looked at my phone, every time I moved, because I was uncomfortable with them being directly behind me, they'd move to be directly behind me again. Every time they would look at something on display, but it just seemed so forced, like they weren't actually interested in the unicorn toys, and they were just looking at them to be behind me. About every 15 seconds for 4 minutes while we were in this line, it kept happening over and over again. They'd even go back and look at something they've already looked at. They went back to the same unicorn toy 4 times. I felt like I was crazy, because maybe one of them had a daughter or niece who would like it, but every time I looked close enough, they were staring at me, watching me. I was seriously freaked out, but I kept telling myself that they weren't going to do anything to me. But just to be safe, I decided not to go fill up the water bottles and just go straight to the car. It wasn't worth risking it. I was still 3 people away from the front of the line. There was some sort of issue with the membership card that held up the line, and more people lined up behind the men. One was a middle-aged woman with her teenager. The woman saw my discomfort and saw how they kept getting behind me over and over again, so she sent her teenager to see if the self-checkouts were open. At this gas station, there was a 50-50 chance that they were. They went down a lot. Meanwhile, those men are getting closer and closer. I had already gotten as close to the person in front of me as socially allowed, but they were breathing down my neck, even brushing against me while they looked at displays of candy and unicorn toys. I was contemplating leaving the snacks at the counter and just walking out. The teenager came back and must have whispered to the woman that the self-checkout was open. The woman walked up to me, took me by the arm and led me to the self-checkout. We watched each other's backs while we checked out. I looked up and saw them still staring at me, and this time they looked fully angry at me. They were about to come and talk to me when she grabbed my bag and receipt and walked me out to my car. Somehow she was so smooth with everything. I don't even think the teenager noticed what was going on. Once we got outside, I saw my car right there and my hubby and kid were inside. I gave her a hug and thanked her for the help getting me out of there. Then we parted ways. I told my hubby everything, trying not to get too emotional about it, just stating the facts about what they did and how they behaved. He seemed equally freaked out by my description of the events and wished he would have had a chance to properly thank the woman. I filled our water bottles at the next gas station and we moved out of that area about 6 months later. Anyway, that woman sees this. You're my hero. Thank you. I don't think I can fully describe how deeply uncomfortable I was in that situation. I was generally scared that they would follow me to my car or something. This happened 15 years ago, when I was 23. I left my boyfriend's place in the city and needed to get gas. The sun had just set, so it was finally dark. I picked a gas station still in the city, close to a bridge that feeds into the highway. The pump had a prepay sign on it, so I went inside to prepay before filling up. I always lock my doors before doing things like that. This was before automatic locks were standard on all cars. I still shudder to think of what might have happened if I hadn't done that, because of what happens next. After I paid, I walked back to my car, and as I approached the driver's side, I noticed a man on the passenger side trying to anxiously open the passenger door several times rapidly. He looked up and noticed me. He looked a little panicked and annoyed. Startled, I asked him to step away. I look around. No other cars at the station. It's just me. Seeming more annoyed than despaired, he says, You give me a ride to the bridge. Please, I need a ride. He again tries to open the door. I said no, firmly, and asked him to step away. Come on, it's only a short distance. I replied with, Well, if it's a short distance, then you can walk. It's a nice evening out, not too cold out. He glared at me, not happy, not moving. I commanded once more for him to please step away, adding, Right now. Have a good evening, sir, but you need to go. I stared at him as he finally, slowly, sulked off after glaring at me. I waited until he was pretty far away, and only then did I frantically unlock the car and then sped off. I still see the image of me walking back to my car from paying inside, only to find him anxiously pulling at the door handle many times. He did this before noticing my approach. What if I hadn't locked it? Would he have been waiting there inside, gun or knife in hand, threatening me to drive off with him? Or did he just simply need a ride? I'll never know, but as a petite, attractive, early 20-year-old woman alone at night, there was no way in hell I was letting this man in my locked car. I just always wonder, What if I hadn't locked it? I may have stepped into that car and into a nightmare. I was at a gas station and went to the register to buy some gas and some drinks as I was going on a small trip. I got there, and there was this large, balding man with a ginger beard with a name tag, Guy. I smiled at him and was polite, since I work in customer service and always try to be nice to everyone, because you'll never know what kind of day said person may be having. Guy smiled at me and asked me if we've met before. I had never seen him in my life, and I made a joke saying, "I just have one of those faces," and laughed it off. I had alarm bells ringing in my head because of his tone. I had a deep sinking feeling in my gut as he took his time checking me out. Guy kept talking to me, saying I looked great today, and he guessed my dead name. But I haven't told anyone my dead name in years, as I'm non-binary and hate people knowing. I try my best to keep my dead name a secret. Plus, I was paying with cash, so I couldn't think of a way that he would know. I smiled more to brush it off, trying to imply that that wasn't my actual name, saying, "No, I go by Royal." He frowned and scratched his beard, and I could have sworn that I saw bloody dandruff or something like that come down onto the counter. I took my change and went out to my car, filling up as quickly as I could. I pulled out my phone with the intent to let the others know my location and just to tell my friends and mom. Feeling hot breath on my head and someone's body pressed up on my back, I spun around and there was Guy. The most godly smell hit my nose as he looked down on me. I'm 5'6", and my best guess is he was 6 foot. Guy smiled, multiple teeth missing. He said I was rude for talking about him behind his back. I laughed it off and apologized. I went quickly to get the gas pump out of my car. Before I could even get my hand on it, Guy grabbed it from me and did it for me, smirking and saying that I shouldn't bother doing such manly things. He went on to explain that he finally knew where he knew me from. He explained that I was a sex slave in a past life, that he was my master, and he knew my frame anywhere. I'm 17 and I've never met this man in my life. I nodded and tried to laugh it off, saying, "Oh, really?" I didn't want to anger him. The man didn't seem to be happy with that. As I tried to go around to get into my car, he opened my passenger door to get in. I was in full panic mode and had started my car and put the pedal to the metal with both doors swinging open. As I drove away, Guy had fallen to the ground and started to scream and curse. I pulled over after a mile and shut both of my doors. So Guy at the gas station, let's not meet again. Not sure if this is creepy enough to share, but I can't stop thinking about it. Maybe I'm just overthinking. Earlier, I was on the way to work and stopped at a nearby gas station to grab a drink and a snack. As I am approaching the drink area, there was a normal-looking guy standing there. By normal, I mean from my perspective, there was nothing off-putting about him, and he looked like a nice person. I see that it's a visibly tight space between him and the fridge doors, so I say, "Excuse me," so I could politely walk towards the water I was eyeing up. As I go past him, he says, "What do you think this is?" As someone who has a sense of humor, I thought he was joking or giving me a hard time, so I just laughed and proceeded to grab a water. I then see him staring at me out of my peripheral vision, so I look over and he's giving me a blank, menacing stare. The smile wiped off my face quickly, and I said, "What?" out of confusion. He then continues to stare at me and just says, "Yeah," almost as if he was implying me that he was telling me off or making a point or something. I just try to ignore it and proceeded to grab a snack. As he approaches the register to check out, I overhear him saying to the cashier, "I feel like people are following me today." To which the cashier responds, "Who?" And he then repeats, I feel like people are following me. I then get in line behind him, and he very much intentionally drops his license, debit card, and other cards. They drop behind him towards me, and he turns to look around and just looks at me. He looks down at the cards and then back up at me. He slowly bent down to pick them up while staring at me, and then proceeded to leave the gas station while looking back at me. I have no idea what I just experienced, but it was very unsettling. I didn't say anything negative to him, nor was I rude to him in any manner when trying to move by him in the gas station. I did not follow him whatsoever, nor did I give him any reason to drop his personal cars behind him towards me. So I'm continuing to ask myself, why did this man act this way? And why did I feel such a menacing energy during my entire time in there? I don't expect anyone to give me specific reasoning as to what I experienced. I just really needed to share what happened. I'm a 30-year-old transgender male. Before the sake of my demeanor when this event occurred, I was a timid 19-year-old lesbian, unleaded into the world immediately after graduation. I just lost my job at McDonald's due to a massive flood taking out a lot of businesses in the area, and I had a girlfriend that lived 30 minutes away, and I needed gas money, so I took a job offered to me by a family friend at a 24/7 gas station in the next town over from mine. The shift I was hired for was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I had never worked a night shift in my life. But I thought it would be pretty cool to have little to no pressure other than to make sure that the coffee was ready at 4 a.m. for the morning regulars. I was required to train on the day shift for the first couple of weeks to get accustomed to the operations. Throughout those weeks, I learned many of the ins and outs of what takes place on the night shift, and I also learned the ins and outs of the people that hung around these places for hours. And there were quite a few. One woman in particular, Melinda. She would come in every morning before and after dropping off our kids at school, around lunchtime, sometimes actually buying us lunch. And in the evenings, when her husband was home, she came in for hours, considering she lived a couple streets over. She was nice, and I started to enjoy her visits, and we all got along so well in the store. It was a fun atmosphere for the most part. So finally, time for me to work the night shift, and my manager was with me for a few nights. I was taking her place on the night shift because she couldn't do it anymore. She was nice, and I admit I had a pretty big crush on her, so I didn't mind spending the time with her. I learned when she worked the night shift, Melinda spent the entire night there. I had been working the night shift alone for a couple weeks, and some of those night shifts drug into the days when we were short-staffed. But again, I needed the money. Anyway, one night I was doing my chores, scrubbing the hot dog rollers, setting coffee filters up for the rush, and mopping the entire store. While emptying the mop bucket, I heard a chime at the door and looked at my watch and saw that it was 2 a.m., which was odd. There typically wasn't anyone coming into the store until about 4, so I was a little upset because I just mopped the floor. I went out to see who it was, and just as I headed out, the movement in the mirror overhead to stop shoplifters caught my eye. There's a man at the counter doing something with a money order machine, and upon looking again, he had a knife. He was cutting the wires. For what reason, I have no clue. While he was cutting it, I heard him muttering, "Where's Bonka?" over and over again. I knew I could walk back and get the phone from the office, but I didn't want him to hear me, so I pulled my phone out and texted Melinda to call the cops. I tried to text quickly as much as I could describe. She told me she would be right down, and I was freaking out with every second that passed. Before she could get there, the man went outside to the gas pumps and threw all the trash cans and started cutting up the gas lines. I took this opportunity to lock the front door in case he tried to get back in, and thank God I did, because he immediately made a beeline to the door and slammed his fists into it. Just as he did, the cops and Melinda showed up, and he was put into the cop car while I explained everything that just happened. Turns out, Bonka was the name he called my manager, whose name is Bianca. He had been obsessed with her in the weeks prior, dropping in nightly and making her feel very uncomfortable, which explains why she couldn't take it anymore. They knowingly threw a timid 19-year-old girl into this mess, and seeing me there instead of her was what turned his obsession into rage. So to the man who became extremely unhinged when they took a woman out of a potentially dangerous situation, and the woman that threw a naive teenager into this world, let's never meet again.